My name is Ethel Marie Collins, 72 years old this past April, though most days I feel somewhere between 40 and 100. Life has a strange way of stretching and collapsing time like that. I used to be a school librarian, the kind who knew every child's favorite book by heart and kept butterscotch candies in her drawer for the ones who needed a little extra sweetness. That life, that woman feels like someone I once met in a dream before the silence. I live alone now in the same house I raised my three children in: Lisa, Kenneth, and Jamie. My husband Gerald passed 10 years ago, and though his side of the bed has long grown cold, his presence still lingers in the quiet way the floor creaks by the stove, or how the back porch light flickers in rhythm like his laughter. He used to say I was the backbone of the family. Funny, isn't it, how the spine can fracture quietly without anyone noticing? Before it all fell apart, my days had a rhythm. Morning coffee brewed slowly while I fed the birds from the kitchen window. I'd hum old Billie Holiday tunes as I wiped down the counter, and sometimes I'd catch myself smiling, thinking about how Lisa used to sing with me, her tiny hand clutching my apron. She was always the most affectionate, at least when she needed something. Kenneth and Jamie were quieter, more like their father. They visited less frequently over the years, but I never let it sting. I told myself they were busy with families, careers, life. I believed it because I needed to. The trouble began quietly, too, like a whisper at the edge of a room. A bit of dizziness when I stood too quickly. Numbness in my right hand that I brushed off as age. My vision would blur sometimes while reading, but I chalked it up to needing new glasses. I didn't want to worry anyone. I didn't want to be a burden. Then one Tuesday morning in late October, I couldn't lift the kettle. My arm just failed me. It trembled as if detached from the rest of me, the water splashing onto the counter. My chest felt tight, not pain exactly, just pressure, like something heavy and invisible was pressing down, daring me to speak up. I sat on the edge of the couch and reached for my phone with shaky fingers. First I called Lisa. It rang and rang before her voicemail clicked in. "Hey, it's Lisa. Leave it." I tried Kenneth next. He picked up but sounded distracted. "Mom, can I call you back? I'm in the middle of something with the kids." I said I was feeling strange, but my voice didn't carry urgency. I never wanted to be dramatic. He said, "You're probably just dehydrated, Ma. Drink some water and lie down." "All right." Then Jamie, my youngest, always the most distant. "You okay?" he asked. "I'll check in tomorrow. Got a meeting now." And just like that, the silence started. I lay down, just like Kenneth said, but the world began spinning sideways. The walls of my living room folded like paper. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I remember the ceiling fan swirling above me, the smell of lemon cleaners still lingering in the air from my morning wipe down. My mind screamed, but my mouth betrayed me. No words came, nothing. When I woke up again, everything was white and sterile. The beeping machines, the IV in my arm, the oxygen mask, all of it felt like waking in another life. Nurses fluttered around, kind but busy. One of them, her name tag said Maribel, leaned in close and said, "You're at Mercy General, Miss Collins. You had a stroke. You're safe now." Safe. I wanted to cry, not from the pain, not even from fear, but from the hollow ache of knowing that none of my children were there, that not one of them had come. I whispered Lisa's name, then Kenneth's, then Jamie's, but Maribel only gave me that smile nurses use when they know more than they're allowed to say. That was the beginning of the silence that changed everything. Before I continue, I want to ask all of you to please give a like to this video and subscribe to my channel, The Silent Stories, for more stories like mine. Your support means the world to me. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment telling me which country you're tuning in from. It's incredible to see how far this community of wonderful people has grown, and I'm so grateful to be able to share my story with you. The ICU was colder than I expected. Not the temperature exactly, but the atmosphere. It had the kind of quiet that makes your bones feel hollow. Everything buzzed softly, monitors, fluorescent lights, a soft rhythm of machines breathing on behalf of patients who couldn't. The walls were pale, the kind of bland that made you forget what sunlight felt like. My hospital bed was parked beside a window, but the blinds were half closed, letting in only slats of a sky I could no longer touch. My name was taped above my head, Ethel M. Collins, female, DOB, April 13th, 1953. Below it was a whiteboard where a nurse had written, "Today is Wednesday," in green marker. "Next to your nurse is Maribel." I appreciated the effort, but it felt like a cruel kind of cheeriness. My mind was sluggish, still swimming through the residue of the stroke, but one question rose again and again like a lighthouse in the fog. Where were my children? I had always believed that if something terrible happened, really terrible, my children would come. Not out of obligation, but out of love. I imagined Lisa storming into the room with that worried frown of hers, clutching my hand tightly like she used to after nightmares. I pictured Kenneth pacing in his work shoes, still wearing his Bluetooth headset, trying to balance concern and control. And Jamie, sweet Jamie, maybe sitting silently beside me, not saying much, but his presence speaking volumes. Instead, there was only an empty chair. I asked Maribel again, "Have my children called?" She hesitated, just long enough for the lie to settle in. "Not yet, Miss Collins, but we've notified them. Sometimes these things take time. Focus on healing, okay?" That word again, healing, as if the worst wound I carried was in my body. The truth was, my body hurt less than my heart. The pain wasn't the tubes or the IV, or the dull pounding in my skull. It was in the silence, in the untouched chair beside my bed, in the way the nurses stopped meeting my eyes when I asked the same question for the third, fourth, fifth time. It's funny what you start to remember when you feel abandoned. Not the big moments, graduations, weddings, Christmas mornings, but the quiet sacrifices. The nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. sewing Lisa's prom dress when we couldn't afford the store-bought one. The time Kenneth broke his wrist in 5th grade, and I sat in that ER for 6 hours, humming to keep him calm. The way Jamie clung to me during thunderstorms, convinced the lightning would come through the windows. Now all I had was static and machines. On the 3rd day, I overheard something that tore open the last scrap of hope I was clinging to. 2 nurses stood just outside my door, their voices hushed but clear enough for me to catch. "Yeah, the kids were contacted. All 3, said they're busy." One asked if she had insurance. "Seriously?" "Yeah," said to let them know if it's, terminal. The second nurse sighed. "She's alert now. Poor woman keeps asking if they're coming." My heart dropped. There it was, the truth bare and cold. They knew I was here, and they weren't coming. I wasn't worth rearranging a calendar for. I wasn't a priority. I was a problem. Later that evening, Maribel changed my IV and gently stroked my hand. "They'll come, Miss Collins," she said quietly. But we both knew they wouldn't. That night the machines beeped steadily as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't crying. I think the tears had dried up somewhere between disappointment and disbelief. Instead, I let my mind wander through memories like flipping through an old photo album. Every sacrifice, every bedtime story, every birthday cake, every "I love you," whispered into sleeping ears. I had given them my everything, and now I was here, alone. The chair beside me remained empty, unclaimed and untouched. Like me. It was sometime after midnight when I first heard the hallway voices again, 2 nurses talking in low tones outside my door. The ICU was a world of strange rhythms where day and night blended together under the hum of machines and the glow of sterile lights, but I could tell this was a whisper meant to stay unheard. "She's still asking about them?" One said, probably thinking I was asleep. "Every day," the other replied. "She asked this morning if maybe her phone was broken. Said Lisa always picks up." That name, Lisa, my eldest. My girl with the stubborn will and the soft heart. Or at least the heart I believed was soft. I closed my eyes tighter. It hurt to listen, but not knowing hurt worse. Nothing since Kenneth asked if they could forward her medical bills. Can you imagine? There was a pause followed by a sigh. "I don't get it. She seems like she was a good mom. The way she talks about them, she adored those kids. And I had, with every fiber of my being. Even now in this lonely bed, their names were still prayers on my lips. I waited until their voices disappeared down the hall before I let myself breathe again. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part just wanted to vanish, to fade into the shadows of the ICU walls and never feel again, but something else stirred too. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in days, maybe weeks. Anger. Not the loud explosive kind, This was quieter, heavier, like a stone in my chest. The kind of anger that grows when love is met with silence, when your lifeline becomes your undoing. I had raised them on my own after their father died when Jamie was only 8. I'd taken triple shifts, missed meals so they could eat, denied myself even the smallest comforts, new shoes, new coats, so they could walk into their futures with dignity. And yet here I was, laid up in a hospital bed, kept alive by machines, and not one of them could be bothered to visit. It was like I'd become an expired product, used up, no longer useful, no longer worth the drive. Maribel came in the next morning to check my vitals, and I asked her gently, "Would you mind giving me a pen and some paper?" She blinked. "Of course, Miss Collins," feeling strong enough to write. Not strong, just ready. She returned with a clipboard and a small stack of lined paper. I held the pen between fingers that still trembled slightly, but I forced them to be steady. With each word I began to pour out everything I couldn't say aloud, at least not to them. "Dear Lisa, Kenneth, Jamie, you were my whole world. From the moment each of you came into this life, you rewrote my story with joy and purpose. I gave you everything I had, and then some. I did it willingly, with a full heart. I never kept score. But now I lie in a bed surrounded by strangers, and your silence is louder than any storm I've ever faced." I paused, my hand clenched the pen tighter. I wasn't writing this for guilt. I knew better. They'd made their choice. I was writing this to let it out, to make space for me, for healing, for closure. Because even if they never read those pages, I needed to say it. By the second page, the tears had returned, not the sobbing kind, just the soft, steady weep of a mother grieving something invisible, something that had been dying long before the ICU. Maribel returned and saw the tears on my cheeks. She didn't ask anything. She just placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and said, "You're stronger than you think, Miss Collins." I didn't answer her then, but in my heart I whispered, "I'm beginning to believe you." They say there's no place like home, but no one prepares you for the heartbreak of returning to a place that no longer remembers you, especially when it's supposed to be yours. The day I was discharged from the ICU, I felt lighter in my body, but heavier in my soul. I had survived, yes. But something had been left behind in that sterile room of beeping monitors and whispered apologies. A part of me was still lying there, quietly wondering why love disappears when it's most needed. The hospital arranged for a transport van to take me home. Not a single family member had called, let alone offered to pick me up. Not Lisa, not Kenneth, not Jamie. The nurse made one last attempt dialing Lisa's number. It went to voicemail. "Do you have someone waiting for you at home?" the driver asked me gently as he helped me into the van. I nodded. But I lied, because what could I say? That I had 3 grown children and not one of them wanted me back. The ride was quiet. The city blurred past the window. Familiar streets turned ghostly in my eyes. Each block was a memory, each stoplight a heartbeat of my old life. I used to walk these very roads with a purse full of grocery lists and a head full of hope. I didn't know then how much loneliness a person could accumulate. We pulled up to the house, my house. The lawn was the same, though a little unkempt. The welcome mat I had crocheted years ago was still there, edges curling. I looked up at the door and paused. The lock was different. That brass doorknob I had polished for years. The one Clarence installed himself back in '82, that was gone, replaced by a newer silver deadbolt. My heart stuttered. "I think there's a mistake," I told the driver. "This isn't my door." He looked at the house, then at his clipboard. "This is the address they gave us. 427 Pineview Drive, right?" I nodded slowly. "Do you have a key?" he asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out my set. It felt heavier than usual in my palm. I tried the key, praying silently. It didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. The driver offered to wait, but I waved him off. "Thank you. I'll be fine." I wasn't. But pride is a stubborn companion. I watched the van disappear down the street, and then turned back to the door. I knocked. Then knocked again. Nothing. Finally, I shuffled around to the back door, hoping the old latch there hadn't been changed. But it had. Every entry point into the home I had poured my life into was now locked against me. I sat down on the porch bench, my breath short, the weight of betrayal collapsing on my shoulders. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lisa again, straight to voicemail, then Kenneth, then Jamie. Nothing. I left a message. I'm at the house. I just got back from the hospital. The locks have been changed. Can someone please call me? I waited. An hour passed. The sun dipped behind the trees. Still no call. A neighbor, Mrs. Dillard from 2 doors down, saw me and walked over, her eyes wide with confusion. Miss Collins, is everything all right? I tried to keep my voice steady. I just got back from the hospital, but I can't get into my house. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Oh dear, I saw some movers here last week. Your son, I think, was giving instructions. I thought you were moving. No, I wasn't, I whispered. She helped me call a locksmith, and by some miracle, he agreed to come that evening. As I waited, I wandered the edges of my flower bed. My lilies were overgrown, choked by weeds. The hydrangeas I planted with Clarence were dying. When the locksmith finally opened the door, I stepped inside and froze. The living room had been rearranged, furniture gone, my favorite reading chair missing, boxes stacked against the walls. The smell no longer warm and familiar, but cold, like dust and disuse. And on the dining table, as if mocking me, sat a folder labeled in bold black marker, Assisted Living Options. Inside were brochures, each more impersonal than the last. At the top of the pile, a sticky note in Lisa's handwriting. We need to have this conversation. You can't stay here. It's not safe for you. Or us. Safe for them. I looked around at the home I had built, one sacrifice at a time, and I suddenly understood. This wasn't my home anymore. They had made that decision long before. Grief doesn't always come with weeping or noise. Sometimes it's just silence, a heavy humming silence that fills a house and echoes louder than any scream ever could. I stayed in that house, my house, for weeks after that cold homecoming. The air inside felt foreign, like someone had vacuumed out all the warmth and left behind only the shell. I couldn't even sit in my own living room without wondering who had touched what, who had packed up pieces of my life like they were junk headed for the curb. The kitchen was the worst. The spice rack I'd built, with each label handwritten in my cursive, was missing. My favorite cast iron skillet was gone too. I found a note under a stack of junk mail that read, "Donated extra kitchen items to shelter. We had to make space." Space for what? For whom? It was a quiet kind of violence. I stopped cooking. I barely ate. My appetite had vanished along with my trust. I moved through each room like a ghost, haunting the spaces I once filled with laughter and food and lullabies. There were moments when I'd find myself in the middle of a room holding something, a dish towel, a photo frame, a cracked cup, and realize I didn't remember how I'd gotten there. One night, I passed a mirror in the hallway. The house was dark, and the hallway light cast a long shadow over everything. I paused and looked, really looked. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her cheeks had thinned. The skin under her eyes hung heavy. Her hair, once a proud crown of silver curls, had lost its shine. Her shoulders were hunched, not from age but from carrying too much heartbreak. She looked like someone who had been forgotten not just by others but by herself. I remember reaching out, fingers grazing the mirror, and whispering, "Where did you go?" That night I cried like a child, not the controlled sobbing we do when we're trying to be strong, but deep, messy, shoulder-shaking tears. I curled into the corner of my bedroom and let it all out. The betrayal, the loneliness, the terrible raw grief of realizing you are no longer needed. But the next morning something strange happened. I woke up, and I don't mean I opened my eyes, I mean I truly woke up. The light coming through the blinds looked different, sharper somehow. I sat up in bed and saw that same mirror, but this time I didn't look away. I walked to it slow and stiff from all the days I'd spent lying in that bed, and I looked again. The woman was still there. She still looked tired, still worn, but her eyes had changed. There was something behind them. Not hope, not yet, but a question. A question that I hadn't asked myself in years. "What do you want?" It startled me. I'd spent so long asking what others needed, what the children needed, what Clarence needed when he was still alive. But me, I had no idea what I wanted. That day, I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table and drank it slowly. I opened a notebook I hadn't touched in a decade and began to write. At first, it was just scribbles, nonsense thoughts, memories, fragments. But by evening, I had filled 10 pages. I found an old camera buried in the hall closet, dusty but still functional. Clarence had given it to me on our 20th anniversary. "For your eye," he'd said. "You always see beauty in strange places." I hadn't touched it since he passed. I took a picture of my teacup, then one of the light on the kitchen tile, then my hands weathered and strong. The click of that shutter was the softest, most defiant sound I'd heard in months. Later that week, I walked down the street to the community center. My legs were weak, but my resolve was stronger. They had a small art class for seniors. Nothing fancy, just a room with good light and a few scattered easels. I introduced myself as just May, not Mom or Grandma or Miss Collins. Just May. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't someone's obligation. I was just a woman with a story, a camera, and the slow burn of rediscovery. They had left me to die, but in the silence they gifted me, I began to remember who I was, who I had always been, and I wasn't done yet. The first time I laughed again, really laughed, it startled me. It wasn't the polite chuckle you give when someone says something mildly amusing, and it wasn't the nervous kind that slips out when you're trying not to cry. No, this was a full-bodied, eyes closed, belly shaking laugh, the kind that bubbles up from a place you thought had gone dry. It happened during one of the art classes at the community center. We were trying our hands at watercolor, something delicate and unpredictable. I was painting a sunflower. At least that's what it was supposed to be. What I ended up with looked more like a mustard stain with aspirations. A woman named Janice, sharp-tongued but kind, leaned over, squinted at my work, and said, "Well, it's either a flower or a crime scene." I don't know why that hit me the way it did. Maybe it was the ridiculousness of the moment. Maybe it was the way she said it with such deadpan sincerity. But whatever it was, something in me cracked open. I laughed until tears blurred the mess on my page, and Janice was laughing too, our little table rocking with the sound. That laugh was the beginning of my new life. It didn't come all at once. Recovery never does. It wasn't like the movies where one big turning point changes everything overnight. It came in slow drips, a cup of coffee sipped in silence without sadness, a walk around the neighborhood without checking my phone for messages that would never come, the way the sun hit the living room floor at exactly 3 p.m. It came in the people I met, the unexpected warmth of strangers who didn't know my history, didn't see me through the lens of what I'd been through, people like Janice and Luis from the front desk who always slipped me extra cookies from the staff kitchen, and Miss Edna who taught me how to crochet and gave me a friendship bracelet like we were 12 again. It came in routines I made for myself, Monday mornings at the library, Tuesday nights with my little painting group, Friday grocery runs where I didn't buy food for anyone but myself for the first time in decades. I even adopted a cat. Well, she adopted me, a scruffy gray thing I found shivering under my porch one morning. I named her Mercy, because she arrived when I needed her most. Mercy followed me everywhere in the house, slept curled against my side like a heartbeat I didn't know I was missing. She didn't care that I moved slowly, that I sometimes cried when I thought no one was watching. She just stayed quiet and warm, asking nothing more than presence. In time, I made a small circle of people who felt like home, not family by blood but something better, family by choice. We shared meals, helped each other with errands, celebrated birthdays with potlucks and mismatched decorations. It was simple, it was joyful, and it was mine. Then one day the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number was familiar in the worst way, but curiosity or maybe closure got the better of me. "Hi, Mom." It was my daughter's voice. The same daughter who hadn't come to the hospital, who had helped lock me out of my own home. "I heard you've been doing well." Her words were careful, like stepping around a wound she wasn't sure was healed. I didn't say anything, just waited. She filled the silence. "Look, I was wondering if maybe we could talk, maybe even visit." I thought of all the nights I waited for that call, the way I used to rehearse what I'd say, how I imagined breaking down in tears, or screaming, or begging her to explain. But now, with the phone warm in my hand, none of that was there. I felt calm. "I appreciate you calling," I said gently, "but I'm in a different place now, and I'm not ready to go back." A pause, then a quiet "okay." We ended the call without promises, and I was okay with that, because the life I had built didn't need apologies to validate it. It stood on its own, held up by my healing, my laughter, and the love I had found in unexpected places. They had left me in the ICU, convinced that I wouldn't make it, convinced that I was done, but I recovered without them. And the life I built from that recovery, it was fuller, freer, and more honest than anything I had before. When you survive what I did, being left in a hospital bed to rot, discarded like yesterday's newspaper, you learn that forgiveness isn't something you give for them. It's something you give yourself to breathe again. But forgiving isn't forgetting, and it's not a free pass to walk back into my life like nothing ever happened. That's what my children didn't understand when they showed up. It was a Saturday morning, bright sky, bird song, the kind of day that begged you to believe in good things. I was on my porch with Mercy curled at my feet, a coffee cup in hand and a book open on my lap. I'd spent months in peace, and that morning felt no different until I saw the car. It was my son's SUV. I knew that license plate, the expensive shine. It pulled up slow, unsure, like even the car knew it didn't belong here. Out came all three, my son, my daughter, and the youngest. The same trio that once sat around my hospital bed arguing about who'd pick up the bills. The same trio that couldn't be bothered to visit, not even once. I stood slowly, placing my book down. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. They approached like strangers. Mom Denise said softly, We just wanted to see you. Can we talk?" I looked at each of them. Their eyes didn't hold cruelty now, just discomfort, awkwardness, guilt maybe. But I'd learned guilt could be shallow. It didn't always mean change. Sometimes it was just regret for being caught. I gestured toward the porch chairs. "You can sit, but don't mistake this for something it's not." They sat, all three of them shifting like the seats burned. Marcus, always the speaker, leaned forward. "We heard from some folks you'd been through a lot, that we weren't there for you." I tilted my head. "Is that how you'd put it?" He swallowed. "We were scared, overwhelmed. We didn't know how to help." I laughed quietly, not unkindly, but without joy. "You didn't need to help. You just needed to show up." They all looked down. Tanya finally broke the silence. "I miss you, Mama. We all do. Can we start over?" That question hung in the air like smoke. Part of me wanted to rush to fill it with comfort, to say yes, of course. But I had built something from my pain, something real, and I owed it to myself to protect it. "No," I said gently. "We can't start over, but we can move forward. From here. Slowly. On my terms." They nodded, hesitantly. I continued. "You may have come here expecting me to cry, to be grateful. I'm not angry anymore either. But I am changed. You taught me something when you left me in that hospital. That I don't need to chase anyone for love, not even my children." Denise's lips trembled. Marcus looked away. Tanya's tears began to fall. "I'm not bitter," I told them, "but I am done waiting, done pleading, done hoping you'll be people you're not. I've made peace with who I am, and I love the life I live now." They sat in silence. What could they say? That they were sorry. They probably were. But sometimes, sorry comes too late to fix what's been broken. Eventually they stood. "We'll give you space," Marcus said. I nodded. That's all I ever needed. They walked back to the car, heads bowed, and as I watched them drive away, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt light, like I'd put down a heavy coat I didn't realize I'd been wearing. I turned back to my porch, picked up my book, and sipped the last of my coffee. Mercy purred against my ankle, and the wind moved gently through the trees. They had come hoping to erase what had been done, but life doesn't work like that. You can't unring a bell, you can only choose what you'll listen to next. And I'd chosen peace. People often say time heals all wounds. I don't believe that. Time doesn't heal. It reveals, it shows you who stood beside you and who turned away. It reveals the shape of your heart when no one is clapping, when no one is calling, when you're left alone to piece yourself back together. That's when you find out who you really are. And me, I found out I was stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. The months after that final conversation with my children were the most peaceful I'd ever known. It was as if closing the door on what used to hurt me opened windows I never knew existed. Sunlight poured in, so did possibility. I got involved with a local support group, not for people recovering from strokes, but for people recovering from abandonment. A circle of older women and men, some who had lost partners, others who'd been cast aside by their families. We met every Wednesday evening in the basement of the town library. Folded chairs, instant coffee, and stories that could crack your heart in half. But we also laughed. Lord, did we laugh. Laughed at the absurdity of how invisible we'd once felt. Laughed at the fact that we were still standing, still breathing, still loving. I became close with a woman named Greta, widowed, 73, no children. She knitted hats for the shelter and taught me how to make peanut brittle that could bring a grown man to tears. One Sunday, she brought over a picture of her late husband, and we shared stories over tea and banana bread. "We're the family we make," she said, and I never forgot it. And Mercy, my sweet rescue cat who once barely let anyone touch her, became my shadow. She'd curl up beside me each night, a small, soft reminder that love doesn't need a bloodline to be real. I redecorated the little house, repainted the walls a warm shade of yellow, hung new curtains, took down the family portraits, not out of bitterness, but out of acceptance. I created a space that reflected who I had become, not the mother who was waiting to be chosen, but the woman who had chosen herself. One day, a young woman from the local college reached out. She was studying social work and had heard my story through the support group. She asked if I would speak to her class. Me give a talk. I hesitated. Then I agreed. That afternoon I stood before a group of students and told them the truth. Not just the facts, but the feelings. The loneliness. The betrayal. The way it burns like ice. And then I told them about recovery. Not just physical but emotional. About finding love in unexpected places. About how healing doesn't look like erasing the past, but honoring the parts of yourself that survived it. When I finished, the room was silent. Then they clapped. A few even cried. And for the first time I felt seen in a way that mattered. Not as someone's mother. Not as someone's patient. But as a woman with a story. Later that night, I walked home under a sky full of stars. The streets were quiet, the air soft, and I thought about how far I'd come. I could have spent the rest of my days bitter, replaying every cruel word, every empty chair, but instead I chose to build a life that had nothing to do with them. A life stitched together from strength, softness, and self-respect. My children still send the occasional text, a birthday message, a generic "hope you're well." I reply with kindness, but I never invite them back in. That door once closed remains closed, not out of hate, but out of love for myself, because I was left to die, left alone in a hospital bed while the people I raised went on vacation. But I didn't die. I lived. I rose, and I never looked back.